Hello and welcome to Sunset Zen and Sleepy Stories. Please relax, listen, and enjoy. The light in the valley. The cottage was available. Nora had checked on a Thursday evening in early November, sitting at her desk in the archive, with her coat still on, because the heating in the building was, as it had been for 11 years, a matter of optimism rather than engineering. She had typed the dates into the booking website, the 23rd of December through the 2nd of January, and held her breath, and the calendar had come back grim. Available. She had sat looking at it for a full minute before she clicked confirm. That had been 6 weeks ago. In the intervening time, she had told exactly 2 people, her friend Priya, who had said finally, honestly, Nora, go, and her mother, who had said, Wales in December? But what will you do? A question that revealed, Nora thought, a fundamental difference in their respective relationships with silence. She had not told Owen. This was not an act of cowardice, or not entirely. They had spoken on the phone twice since October, conversations that had the careful, exploratory quality of 2 people learning the shape of something new, feeling for edges. He had called the first time, in late October, to say that he'd seen a murmuration and thought of her. She had called 3 weeks later, on a rainy Tuesday, for no reason she could have named, except that she'd been reading about plant ecology, and the thought of him had arrived in her chest with the solid, uncomplicated certainty of a fact. They had talked for 2 hours. She had gone to bed feeling warm in a way that had nothing to do with the temperature. But she had not said, I'm coming back for Christmas. She wanted to see his face when she arrived. She thought it might tell her something important. The drive took 4 hours from London, which was an hour more than it should have, because the M4 had decided to perform some kind of seasonal drama involving 3 lorries and a contraflow. By the time she turned off at the junction, she knew dusk had already arrived, and by the time she reached the lanes above Llanbryn, it was full dark, with a particular quality of rural dark that still surprised her. Not black exactly, but a deep layered blue, so present it felt like a substance rather than an absence. She almost didn't need the sat-nav. She knew the turning now, the hawthorn, the lane, the descent into the valley. The cottage appeared at the bottom, and this time there were lights in the windows. Nora sat in the car with the engine off, looking at them. Warm amber rectangles in the dark. Someone had been here ahead of her. She got out. The cold was a different cold from London. Not harsher, exactly, but more honest. It smelled of wet stone and wood smoke, and something green and living underneath. She stood for a moment with her face tilted up, because above the valley the sky was extraordinary. No cloud, no light pollution, and the stars so numerous and close that the sky looked almost textured. She had forgotten about the stars. She had spent 6 weeks in London forgetting that the sky looked like this. She knocked on the cottage door and waited. It opened, and Owen Griffith was standing there in a jumper the colour of oatmeal, with his sleeves pushed up and a look on his face that was not quite surprise, which told her, she thought, rather a lot. You knew, she said. Mrs. Price, he said. She mentions everything to everyone. I'm going to have words with Mrs. Price. You won't. You'll have tea with her and she'll tell you about her daughter's new baby, and you'll leave liking her more than ever. He stepped back from the door. Come in. The fire's going. She came in. The hall with its iron hooks. The staircase. the warm light from the left. She hung up her coat, and on the hook beside it she noticed a familiar waterproof jacket. "You left it on purpose," she said. "A strategic investment," he said. The sitting room was different for Christmas. Not dramatically different. The same bookshelves, the same bracken-coloured sofa, now correctly positioned facing the fire, the same round table by the window. But someone had put a small bunch of holly on the mantelpiece, and there was a fat beeswax candle burning on the table, and the fire was built higher than usual, generous with itself. Owen had lit it before she arrived, of course. She looked at it and felt something shift quietly in her chest. "Sit down," he said. "I'll make tea. You don't have to. You've driven 4 hours. Sit down." She sat. Mist, who had been lurking in the kitchen doorway assessing the situation, came over and put her head on Nora's knee with the air of someone confirming a prior understanding. Nora put her hand on the dog's head. "She remembered me," Nora said. "Dogs don't forget people they've decided to like," Owen called from the kitchen. "It's people who do that." Nora looked at the fire. She thought about the 6 weeks. She thought about 2 phone calls, 2 hours each, and the specific shape of Owen's voice when he was thinking carefully about something. A half-beat of silence before he spoke, every time, as though the words deserved to be chosen. He came back with 2 mugs and sat in the armchair across from her, and they drank their tea with the fire between them and the dark outside, and the particular comfort of 2 people who know they have time. "Tell me about the archive," he said. "The last 6 weeks." So she did. She told him about the collection they were processing, the papers of a Victorian naturalist, thousands of letters and notebooks, a life's worth of careful observation, and the particular pleasure of handling something that had been made with such attention. She told him about the colleague who had retired and the small, insufficient card they had all signed. She told him about the Thursday evening when she'd booked the cottage, though she didn't say why she hadn't told him. He looked at her over his mug. "Why didn't you tell me? I wanted to see your face." "And you'd been told by Mrs. Price," she said. "I didn't get to see your actual face." He considered this. "I was glad," he said, "if that helps." "It does," she said, "a bit." The fire shifted and settled. Outside, distantly, a fox called, a strange, almost human sound in the dark, and then silence. "There's something I've been meaning to say," Owen said, "since October." Nora waited. "I'm not very good at..." He stopped. Tried again, with the familiar half-beat of consideration. "When my wife left, I think I decided that the way to avoid being wrong again was to be very careful, and careful became slow, became not saying things until I was certain." He set his mug down. "I'm fairly certain now." "Fairly," Nora said. "Quite certain." Something moved at the corner of his mouth. "Nora, Owen." "I'm glad you're here," he said. "Not just here at the cottage. I'm glad you exist, and that you found that letter, and that Mrs. Price rang me to say you'd booked the cottage again. I'm glad about all of it." Nora looked at him across the fire for a long moment. "I booked 10 days, she said. "Christmas to New Year." "I know, Mrs. Price." "I didn't have other plans," she said. "I mean, I had invitations. My mother, Priya's family. I chose to come here instead." He held her gaze. He was doing the thing he did, the steady, attentive looking, that she had thought about in London more than was probably sensible. "I know," he said. "I'm glad about that too." "Good," Nora said. "That's settled then." He did smile then. the real one. She had 3 days before Christmas, and she spent them in the particular way she had learned in October, slowly, with attention, as though time were a place you could actually inhabit, rather than a resource to be managed. She walked every morning. The valley in December was a different creature from the valley in October, the hedgerows stripped to their structure, the hills a clear, austere brown, every stone wall legible without the screen of leaves. The light, when it came, arrived low and golden and at a slant that made the landscape look ancient, which it was. When the dome of the south, she found new paths she hadn't found before, following tracks that wound up the ridge and looked out over a wider country. Hills layered on hills, the sky enormous. Owen joined her most mornings. Not every day, he had a farm to run, and December was not a quiet month for sheep, but most. They walked and talked, and sometimes didn't talk, which was its own kind of pleasure. She was learning that Owen's silences were not lapses but presences, that he was comfortable with quiet, in the way of someone who has spent a great deal of time in it. On the morning of Christmas Eve, they walked up to the ridge and found the world white. Not deeply, an inch of snow perhaps, that had come in the night, but enough to transform everything. The hills were clean and still. The sky was a pale grey-white, thick with the promise of more. Their boots made the first marks on the path. "I haven't seen snow like this in years," Nora said. She meant she hadn't seen it fall on a landscape that had room for it. In London, snow was an inconvenience, dirtied within hours, a nuisance. Here it was just itself. "It'll be gone by tomorrow, most likely," Owen said. "Too wet here to keep it long. Don't ruin it." "I'm not ruining it. I'm giving it appropriate seasonal respect." She laughed, and the sound went out across the white hill, and then they were at the top, and below them the valley lay transformed, the dark lane a white thread, the farmhouse and the cottage beneath their new pale roofs. Smoke rising from chimneys in vertical columns in the still air. Nora stood and looked at it. "Last Christmas," she said, "I was in the flat. I'd been divorced 5 months. My mother came to stay, which was kind of her, and we went to the service at the church near the flat, which neither of us goes to normally, because it seemed like the thing to do. And I sat in the pew and thought, I have to completely reconstitute my life. Which is a strange thing to think in a church at Christmas, but there it was. Owen said nothing. He was listening. I didn't know what any of it would look like. She said, I couldn't imagine it. I just knew it had to be different. She looked at the valley below. This is different. Is it what you imagined? I didn't imagine it. That was rather the point. They stood for a moment in the white quiet. Come on, Owen said. We're going to Eleanor's for mince pies. Are we? She invited you. Through me. She said to bring you for mince pies on Christmas Eve, or don't bother coming myself. He started back down the path. You've made quite an impression on my grandmother. I like your grandmother. She likes you. She says you have sense. He glanced back. She doesn't say that about many people. Eleanor Griffith had decorated her small cottage with the thoroughness of someone who had been doing it for 80-odd Christmases and had refined the operation to its essentials. There was no excess, no tinsel, no inflatable anything, but what was there was exactly right. A wreath on the door of fresh holly and ivy. A small tree in the corner, hung with glass ornaments so old they had the particular luminous quality of things made before mass production. A bowl of clementines on the table, filling the room with their scent. On the mantelpiece, a row of Christmas cards, and among them Nora noticed the photograph. Owen as a boy, perhaps 10 years old, gap-toothed and squinting into summer sun, with Eleanor's hand on his shoulder. Eleanor said, the same words Owen used, with the same tone of someone who has decided that sitting is what will happen and is waiting for agreement. She was in a dark red cardigan and looked well and sharp-eyed, and she looked at Nora with the particular attention of someone storing information. You came back, Eleanor said. I said I might. People say they might, Eleanor said. As a polite way of saying probably not. You actually came. I liked it here. Eleanor's eyes went briefly to Owen and then back. Yes, she said. I expect you did. The mince pies were homemade and quite remarkably good. Short, crumbling pastry, mincemeat that had clearly been made months ago and left to develop opinions. Owen ate 3 without apparent effort. Eleanor drank her tea and asked Nora questions about the archive with the focused interest of someone who genuinely wanted to know, not as politeness but as inquiry. And Nora found herself talking about her work in a way she rarely did with people who weren't archivists themselves. The texture of it, the quiet satisfaction of it. What it meant to spend one's days in the company of things that had been preserved. My mother kept everything, Eleanor said. Letters, receipts, dance programs, seed catalogues, all of it in a tin trunk in the attic. When she died, I went through it and I cried for 3 days, not because I was sad, though I was, but because of how much of her was in there, how much of a person a life leaves behind. That's exactly it, Nora said. That's exactly what it is. Eleanor nodded, satisfied. She looked at Owen. She'll do, she said, in Welsh, which, from Eleanor, was evidently high praise. Owen said nothing, but his expression did something complicated. I understood the tone of that, Nora said, even if not the words. It was complimentary, Owen said. I'll take your word for it. You should, Eleanor said crisply. I don't give compliments I don't mean. Life's too short. She poured more tea. Now, tell me what you know about Victorian naturalists. She woke on Christmas morning to the sound of bells. Not close. The village church was 2 miles away, but the air was still enough that they carried, faint and certain, across the valley. She lay in the small bedroom under a quilt that smelled of lavender and listened until they stopped. Then she lay a little longer, looking at the ceiling, thinking of nothing much. She had, she realized, slept perfectly. No traffic, no upstairs neighbors, no ambient anxiety. Just sleep, and then bells, and now morning. She got up and went downstairs. Someone had been in. The fire was lit, not recently, because it had caught and settled into a steady burn, which meant whoever had come early. On the kitchen table was a bunch of snowdrops, the first of the year, impossibly early, white and bowed in a jam jar, and beside it a small package, wrapped in brown paper and tied with garden twine. She stood looking at it for a moment, then at the snowdrops. She opened the package. Inside was a book, small, old, its spine repaired at some point with linen tape. She opened it. On the title page, in a copperplate hand much like the one she'd spent October reading, Wildflowers of the Welsh Marches, with observations and illustrations, 1887. Below that, in a different ink and a different hand, more recent, for anyone who looks carefully. O.G. She sat down at the kitchen table with the book and the snowdrops in the fire, and she stayed there for a long time. Owen arrived at 11, with mist and a canvas bag containing, it turned out, the components of Christmas dinner. He had been insistent, when she'd asked on Christmas Eve, that she was not to cook. "You've driven 4 hours and you're a guest in the valley. Sit down." She had pushed back approximately once before recognizing it as a losing position. He cooked with the same economy and confidence he brought to everything, moving around her kitchen as though he'd done it many times, which perhaps he had. The cottage had been in and out of his care for years. He made no fuss. He handed her tasks. "Peel those, would you, and cut them roughly. It doesn't need to be precise." She peeled and cut. Mist slept by the range. The kitchen filled with the smell of roasting and thyme, and eventually the bright, cold sweetness of a clementine that Nora ate in quarters while leaning against the counter, watching Owen make gravy with the focused expression of a man who takes gravy. "Seriously, thank you for the book," she said. He didn't look up from the pan. "I found it in a box of my grandfather's things. Plant man, my grandfather. I thought you'd like it." "It's a book," he said. It seemed right. She looked at his profile, the long, angular face, the slight furrow of concentration. "The snowdrops," she said. "They're impossibly early. There's a bank by the south wall of the kitchen garden that always gets the first snowdrops. December sometimes, if it's been mild." He stirred the gravy. "I've been watching for them since November." She thought about that for a moment. He had been watching for the first snowdrops since November so that he could bring them to the cottage on Christmas morning. "I have something for you too," she said. "I'll give it to you after dinner." He glanced at her then. "You didn't have to." "I know. Eat your gravy, Owen." He almost smiled. They ate at the table by the window, which looked out over the lane and the fields beyond, white still at the edges where the snow had collected against the walls. They ate slowly and talked about everything. His grandmother, the Victorian naturalist, a paper Owen was apparently writing for a land management journal, a book Nora had read on the train coming down. The question of whether the range had a personality, and if so, what kind. Outside, 2 chaffinches appeared on the windowsill and regarded the scene with proprietary interest. "Tell me about your Christmases growing up," Nora said. "Loud," Owen said. "My parents had 4 children and a tendency to collect additional people, aunts, neighbours, whoever was on their own. My mother would cook for 12 and there would be 17. He looked at the window. "It's quieter now." "My parents are in Portugal. They retired there 8 years ago. My siblings are scattered." A pause. "It's fine. I like it here. You don't go to them." "Not every year. I can't always leave the sheep." She thought about him, past Christmases, the quiet farmhouse, the valley. She thought about her own flat, her mother's polite visits, the way this year had felt like holding breath. "Next year," she said, without quite planning to, "you should come to London for part of it, if you wanted. See what it's like from my end." He looked at her steadily. "Leave the valley." Briefly. "I'll bring you back." "Your flat," he said. "You've described it as approximately the size of my kitchen." "It is approximately the size of your kitchen. You'd have to sleep on the sofa." "I see. It has a very good sofa." He held her gaze. "All right," he said. "All right? Yes. London. Next Christmas, or some of it." He picked up his fork again. "Mist will have to come." "Mist is welcome," Nora said. "My building has a no pets rule, which I'm choosing to address by simply not mentioning it." After dinner, they sat by the fire with the remains of a bottle of wine and the book of wildflowers open between them. Owen identifying the illustrations with the ease of a man who had grown up among all of them, and Nora reading the Victorian naturalist's observations aloud, which were, it turned out, frequently wonderful, precise and meticulous, and, here and there, quietly astonished at what he was looking at. "The common harebell," she read, "which is neither common nor simple, being in this observer's experience among the most perfectly constructed of all the small flowers, as though whatever made it had taken special care." "That's the kind of thing I want to write," Owen said, "and never quite manage. You said you're writing a paper about grazing management and upland wildflower recovery, which is important but not," he gestured at the book. "It's not that. Write both," Nora said. "The paper for the journal and the other thing for yourself." "What other thing?" Whatever it is you'd write if you were writing for the harebill and not the journal." He looked at her. The fire moved and the shadows moved with it. "I'll give you your present now," Nora said. She got up and retrieved from her bag a package somewhat larger than the book he'd given her, wrapped in the same brown paper, because she had thought of that and matched it deliberately. She handed it to him and sat back down. He opened it with the careful economy he brought to everything, folding the paper back rather than tearing it, which made her smile. Inside was a folder. He opened it. A sheaf of papers, photocopies, archival quality, the edges labelled with the neat reference numbers of someone who works with documents for a living. He leaned closer and read. They were records. Parish records, census returns, a page from an 1891 estate ledger, 2 letters, all of them mentioning Thomas Morgan, some mentioning Elspeth. Owen looked up. "I went back to the archive," Nora said. "Not my archive. I had to ask a colleague at the county record office in Powys. It took a few weeks. But there was more than Eleanor knew." She touched the edge of the folder. Thomas Morgan visited Helen Bryn twice after he came back. There are 2 records of it, a parish visitor log and a letter from the vicar to the bishop about a land matter that Thomas was involved in, where he's mentioned as present. She looked at Owen. Both visits were in December. Chris no way where they were dead, but a small distant greeking that had suffered all over her. Owen was very still. "He came back to the valley every Christmas," Nora said. "For 20 years, from what I can find. He never had a conversation with Elspeth that's recorded anywhere. We'll probably never know if he did. But he came. He didn't stop coming." Owen looked down at the papers. He was quiet for a long time. "Margaret should see this," he said. "I made 2 copies, one for her." He looked up. Something in his face was open in a way she hadn't seen before, less guarded, as though the folder in his hands had somehow given him permission. "You went to Powys," he said, "to the record office. I had a colleague do most of the initial search. I went to verify and to make the archival copies." "Nora," he said. "It seemed right," she said. The story wasn't finished. He set the folder carefully on the table and looked at her, and then he leaned across and kissed her. Not the careful kitchen kiss of October, brief and suspended, but properly, with both hands framing her face, as though he'd thought about it and decided to commit. She kissed him back with equal commitment. When they stopped, she was smiling. "I drove 4 hours," she said. "I know. I want that acknowledged." 4 hours, he said. "Acknowledged." Outside, the snow was coming again. She could see it in the firelight through the window, fine and steady, the kind that settled. The valley was disappearing quietly into white. The fire popped and the candle on the table burned, and mist, from her position by the hearth, made a sound of deep satisfaction and went back to sleep. The snow stayed for 3 days, which Owen said was unusual, and which Nora treated as a gift. The valley under snow was a different world. She walked every morning in borrowed Wellingtons that were too large by half a size and required a particular shuffling gait that Owen found amusing. The paths she'd learned were still there. She could feel them underfoot, but disguised, transformed, requiring a different kind of attention. She liked the extra attention. She liked having to look carefully. Owen's days were fuller than usual. Snow meant more work with the sheep, checking on them, making sure the older ewes were sheltered, breaking the ice on the water troughs. She went with him sometimes, across fields she hadn't been in before, learning the topography of his farm through winter. He explained things as they went, not lecturing but including, assuming she was interested because she was. She learned in these days the ordinary texture of his life. He was up at 6, always. He read in the evenings, history mostly, and natural history, and occasionally the kind of large Victorian novel that other people found intimidating. He cooked well and without fuss, and had opinions about bread. He was patient with difficult things, a ewe who wouldn't cooperate, a gate whose hinge had swollen in the cold, in the particular way of someone who has learned that patience is more efficient than frustration. He was funny, quietly and without announcement, in the way of people who are funny because they see things clearly. She liked him very much. She was aware that very much was understating the situation, but she was content to let the understatement stand for now, like a placeholder for something she would find the right words for later. Margaret Davies came on the 28th, when the snow had thinned to patches on the higher ground. She came with a tin of Welsh cakes and an expression that suggested she had already heard the news, which she had, because Mrs. Price. She sat at the kitchen table and looked at the archival documents with the same quality of attention Eleanor had brought to the original letter, thorough, deliberate, twice through before she spoke. He came back every year, she said. Every December I could find records for, Nora said. There may have been more. He came back every year, Margaret said again. Not quite a repetition, more like someone locating a fact in their body, somewhere it would stay. And she, Elspeth, she was here. She was in this valley. She was. Margaret was quiet. Outside the kitchen window, a robin landed on the garden wall and considered them. I used to think it was a sad story, Margaret said at last. A man who had a daughter he never knew, a girl who grew up without her father. She smoothed the edge of the documents. But he came back. Year after year, he came back to this valley. Whether she knew it or not, he came back. Yes, Nora said. Margaret looked at her. You did this, she said. You found the letter, and now you've gone and found the rest of it. It's my job, Nora said. More or less. It's more than a job, Margaret said firmly, in the tone of someone who is not going to argue about it. You can call it a job if you like. I'll call it what I call it. She stayed for 2 hours. Before she left, she looked around the sitting room, the fire, the shelves, the holly still on the mantelpiece, and said, in the voice of someone making a statement of fact, my great-grandmother was happy in this house. Whatever else, she was happy here. After she'd gone, Nora stood at the window watching her drive away up the lane and felt, quite suddenly and without warning, the full weight of the last 14 months. The marriage ending, the flat, the long process of learning to be alone. And then October, and the letter, and all of this. It wasn't sadness. It was more like the feeling at the end of a journey, and you arrive somewhere and set down what you've been carrying and notice how heavy it was. Owen came up behind her and put his hands on her shoulders. "All right," he said. "Yes," she said, just taking stock. And she turned to look at him. "And I think things are quite considerably better than they were." "Yes," he said, "they are." She had one more day. She spent the morning as she had spent every morning, walking in the Wellingtons. The last of the snow blue-shadowed in the hedgerow hollows, and the lane running clear. The valley smelled of cold earth and something clean underneath, the green potential of the year coming. She walked to the ridge and looked out over the country, and stayed there longer than she usually did, not wanting to miss it. Owen found her there at noon with a flask of tea, which she received with gratitude and no surprise, because she was beginning to understand that this was the kind of thing he did, noticed and acted on the noticing, quietly. "Last full day," he said. "I know." They stood and drank their tea and looked at the country below. "I want to ask you something," Owen said, "and I'd like you to think about it properly before you answer." Nora looked at him. "Come at Easter," he said, "and come in summer, if you can. And if you want," he stopped. The half beat. "If you want, at some point, to see what it would be like to stay longer, I think we should talk about that." Nora was quiet for a moment. The hills were very still. "That's 3 things," she said. "Yes, Easter," she said. "Yes, summer. Yes." She looked at him. "And the 3rd one is larger. I know it is. I have a job in London. An archive that needs me. I have a flat, even if it's the size of your kitchen. I have." She gestured at the whole apparatus again, the life she'd spent 14 months trying to reconstitute. "I know," Owen said. "I'm not asking you to abandon it. I'm asking you to think about it, what it might look like, whether there's a version that works." He met her gaze. "I've been thinking about it since October." She looked at the valley below. Cefn Cottage with its grey slate roof, smoke rising from the chimney, her fire, she'd built it herself this morning. She knew how now. The farmhouse beyond, the lane between them, the stone walls, the fields in their winter colours. She thought about a Victorian man who had come back to this valley every Christmas for 20 years, even when he had no reason anyone could see. She thought about a woman who had run her hand along a wall and said, "Someone is trying to speak to me through the wall." Some things took time. Some things had to be approached slowly, with attention, the way you approached a very old document, carefully, with both hands. "Ask me again at Easter," she said. "I'll have had more time to think." "All right," he said. "And I'll have some ideas by then," she said, "about what it might look like." He looked at her. "You're already thinking about it." "I've been thinking about it since October," she said. "Keep up, Owen." He smiled, the real one, immediate and unguarded, and she thought, not for the first time, that it was quite a good smile to be on the receiving end of. They came down off the hill in the late afternoon, into the blue hour before dark. In the farmhouse kitchen they made dinner together, something simple, and opened a bottle of wine that Owen had been keeping for the right occasion, and had apparently decided this was it. The radio was on low, not classical this time, something with guitar that floated under the conversation without demanding anything. At midnight, technically, It was a new year. They were not awake at midnight. Nora had fallen asleep on the bracken sofa somewhere around 11, a book open on her chest, the fire still going, mist a warm weight across her feet. Owen, reading in the armchair, had put a blanket over her and turned off the lamp and let her sleep. He had thought, watching her, that she looked like someone who had come home, and had let the thought sit in him without examining it too closely, because some things deserved to be approached slowly. She drove away in the early morning of the 2nd of January. The valley was grey and still, frost on the lane, the stone walls laced with white. She drove slowly, as she had in October, past Owen's farmhouse, where the kitchen light was on, past the ruined farmstead and the ford. She came to the top of the lane and turned onto the road. She was smiling. She had Eleanor's phone number in her pocket, which the old woman had pressed upon her with the words, "Ring me when you're back. I want to know you got there safely, and I have more to tell you about the Morgans." She had Margaret's email address. She had 2 weeks of walking in her legs, and 10 days of proper sleep, and the wildflower book in her bag, and a conversation she intended to have in April. The road straightened and widened, and the hills opened out, and then the motorway was ahead, and London, and the archive, and the flat that was the size of a kitchen, and all the ordinary substance of her reconstituted life. Something was playing that she liked. She turned it up. Behind her, the valley folded back into itself and kept what it kept, the way it always had. The end until Easter.